This is an NBC Palm Springs special report. Coronavirus facts, not fear. Presented by East Valley COVID-19 testing site, serving residents of eastern Coachella Valley.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us for this NBC Palm Springs special report, Coronavirus Facts, Not Fear. We dedicate this half hour each day to in-depth interviews with a range of experts and professionals. And even though it's been pushed off the front pages, it's more important now than ever to hear directly from our local leaders as we sift through confusing and changing, and for this time period right now, ignored information. Let's get right to it. The Senate today passed a bill to reform the Paycheck Protection Program. The bill passed the House last week. The push for bipartisan fixes to the program comes as business owners have complained the current terms of use are overly restrictive and do not offer enough flexibility amid the crisis. The bill gives business owners more time to use loan money and still have it forgiven. Joining us now, sports in the Coachella Valley. The one and only Larry Bohannan works for the Desert Sun. They're sports aficionado, history buff, one of our favorite guys. Larry, thanks for being here.
No problem. I don't have anything else to do today.
Yeah, so it would seem. Let's talk about sports in the COVID world. Now, on a micro level, I know my daughter's been off the field now for 3 months. Her head's going to explode if she doesn't get back on the soccer field. All the way through the professionals. These guys have got to be chomping at the bit. So let's take this a sport at a time. We should be in the middle of Major League Baseball. We should be seeing things heating up at Dodger Stadium and Angel Stadium. Any chance we're going to see any Major League Baseball this year?
You know, I think there's a chance we'll see something, but it'll be a very truncated season. The owners and the Players Association seem to be miles apart in terms of coming to some kind of an agreement about reimbursement, what the salaries are going to be. But I think the truth is, and I know it's baseball, so history tells us this isn't happening, but I think cooler heads will prevail. And they'll realize that they need to have some kind of a season in order to stay in the good graces of the fans, many of whom don't want to see billionaires fighting with millionaires when they're actually still on unemployment themselves. So I think they'll have some kind of a season and maybe have something done by October 1st. November 1st for playoffs.
Right, because this is, and I have to admit, it's hard to feel sorry for a guy who normally would make $30 million in a season, but he's only going to get $15 million, right? You're going to lose the public when that's your fight.
Yeah, and I think the players kind of understand that. You know, obviously, if you're supposed to make $37 million this year and you end up making $8 million, that's a fairly large chunk of money. But given the circumstances, and listen, you know, there's no sympathy for the owners here because they're the billionaires in the fight. So they need to do something to get something played. Otherwise, this drags into next year, and who knows how bad that could be in terms of fan interaction.
Right. NBA talking about coming back with just the 22 teams that would be playoff eligible at this point, and not the other, I believe, 8 teams would be participating. That looks like it's going to work out. When do you think we're going to start seeing the Lakers back on the hard court?
You know, that's going to be sometime in July. Obviously, the players need to get themselves back into playing shape. There are a lot of things that have to be done in terms of getting. Apparently, this is all going to be in what they call basically a dome down at Disney World in Orlando, Florida. The question, I think, right now is whether they're going to have a shortened end of the regular season before they start the playoffs, or just go to the playoffs. Obviously, with 22 teams, you can't have 22 teams in a 16-team playoff. So I think they're trying to weed a few teams out with some regular season games, and then go ahead and do the playoffs. What we also don't know is whether those playoffs will all be 7-game series or whether some of them will be best of 5. There's a lot of things that have to be worked out, but the NBA seems to be a little bit ahead of everybody else in terms of getting the games back on the court sometime this summer.
Right. Well, let's talk before we move on to the other sports, because pro football looks like they're full steam ahead, that they've got their schedule in place, and it looks like they're going to try to stick to what would be at least as close as you can get to a normal schedule. But all of this is with the understanding there's going to be nobody in the stands. How weird is that going to be, do you think? And this idea that you can put 20,000 in a 70,000 seat stadium and then keep them apart. I mean, are we looking at possibly a whole fall, maybe even into early next spring, sports with nobody in the stands?
I think the idea right now is that you're going to see some sports who will just say, no, we're not going to have fans. I think probably by the beginning of the winter, sometime around November or so, you'll start to see more and more fans in the stands, but you're not going to be full stadiums. You're not going to have those 100,000 fans at Ohio State or Michigan or those massive stadiums. You'll have some kind of percentage of 25% or 50% of those seats, much like we are doing right now with restaurants, that are opening up, but they're not really at full capacity. So you'll see some kind of fans. I know for the PGA Tour, which begins next week, as a matter of fact, the tournament in Fort Worth, Texas, they're not planning on having fans for at least 3 weeks, and that might stretch out to another 7 weeks.
Yeah, the thing about golf, though, is they never really made their money with the people attending the event anyway, maybe the Masters as an exception.
Sure.
But the other sports, is there enough TV money for football to play the kind of season and pay the salaries they pay without people there buying beer and buying hot dogs?
I think certainly for the National Football League, there is that kind of money because they make so much money on their television deals and their overall sponsorship deals. You always see the official this or that of the National Football League.
Sure, yeah.
Well, that's where a lot of that money comes from. I think it's a little different when you talk about college football. College football does require people to be in the stands, I think. They need that revenue, not just for the football, but also for the idea that football pays for a lot of smaller sports, like golf or tennis or, cross country or something like that. So I think college football really needs to have fans, but you're not going to have, again, full stadiums. You will have some revenue, but you will not have the normal revenue that you would get from that sport.
Now, I know that you're a big fan of the Bundesliga, which was one of the first professional leagues to start playing again. And I watched it the first weekend, and it was just weird. You could hear the players hollering. There was that echoey thing in the empty stadium. Now, by the second weekend for TV, they added a crowd noise, right? Just generic crowd noise to sort of fill up the sound. And it was much, much better. Then the empty seats didn't seem to bother as much. Do you think when it comes to the TV presentation, whether it's basketball, baseball, or football, that we might see some enhanced crowd sounds just put in there, just so while we're watching it, it feels and sounds a little bit more like normal?
Well, Joe Buck, who's the lead announcer for the National Football League for Fox Sports, had said that he thought Fox Sports would probably pipe in noise. And there was a little bit of a backlash over that, about, that would make it sound phony. But if you want to hear something sound phony, let's watch a sport where there's no crowd noise. We've seen a couple of golf tournaments in the last few weeks, short, small little tournaments that had no crowd. And it was missing. I mean, in one of those tournaments, Tom Brady holed out from the middle of a fairway. And, you really wanted to hear that big roar from the gallery, and there was no big roar from the gallery.
Yeah, there's four guys.
So it will be weird without, it'll be weird without fans for a while. But I do think that, it's everything in the world right now seems to be the new normal.
Right.
And that may be our new normal for at least 5 or 6 months.
Let's talk about our own events here in the Coachella Valley. The first big event, I think, generally would be the American Express in January for us. What's your gut right now on whether or not that will return to some semblance of normalcy?
I would think that, that's in January. So that's 7 months away now. And the PGA Tour will have gone through a lot of tournaments. They will have a lot of information about what works, what doesn't work, the testing of players, the testing of staff, things like that. So I don't have any problem with the idea that tournament will be played in January. There are other questions that would have to be answered. Last year they had 20,000 people on the on the driving range for a couple of concerts.
Right.
Stevie Nicks and Luke Bryan. Will that be a possibility even in January, all those months later?
Right.
They have a Pro-Am that's an integral part of that tournament where the amateurs play right next to the pros. Some PGA Tour events have canceled their Pro-Ams. So we'll see how that works. But in terms of it being played in January, I don't think there's an issue there.
Right. Now, what about March for the tennis? Of course, canceled this year. One of the first big events that was canceled because of the virus. It seemed like a knee-jerk reaction early on for a lot of us. We thought, why are they pulling the plug on this already? Now, obviously, it looks like the right decision. By March of next year, do you think we're going to have 12,000 people on center court?
I think we'll have people at center court. I'm not sure about filling the place up. Either Stadium 1 or Stadium 2, which is a smaller stadium, but more intimate, maybe people closer together.
Right.
But I don't think there's any question that there will be a tournament. The U.S. Open, which is played in Flushing Meadows in New York, is going through all kinds of dance moves right now to make sure that tournament gets played. The French Open is going to be played a little later this year. Those are the tournaments I think that'll be very interesting to watch again and see, how things are different. Well, whether the players are accepting balls directly from ball kids or whether they got to go get them themselves, so that there's no extra touching of equipment and the like. There's a lot of things that will be different, but I do believe that by next year the BNP Paribas Open will be played, and it will be played with some gallery.
All right. He's Larry Bohannan, sports writer for the Desert Sun. Thank you, as always, sir, for your time and your expertise. I appreciate it.
Anytime, Gina.
All right. We'll be right back after the break. Yeah, actually, before we go to break, we've gotten calls in the newsroom, and we felt it a little bit here. There's just been an earthquake, a 5.1 in Searles Valley, which is basically Ridgecrest area, the same place where the last major quake that struck up in that area. It was felt in La Quinta, Palm Springs, as far away as Los Angeles and Barstow. So again, a 5.1 earthquake struck just a short time ago. It's about 200 miles from where we are now, but many Valley residents say they felt what they described as a slow swaying kind of quake. So 5.1 at Searles Valley, if you were concerned. We'll, of course, continue to gather information to see if there's any damage or injuries up in the area of Ridgecrest. We'll have that for you tonight. We'll be back after the break.